WHGE 95.3 FM. Coming up, the Open Eye.
Those of us that indulge in or commit intellectual violence don't do so for the pleasure of mental masturbation or ego diddling. We do so because it changes the impression on our people's minds of deep and difficult to remove.
Good morning, my children of the sun. Welcome to the Open Eye on WHGE 95.3 FM. I'm your host, Third Eye Optometrist Patrice Gibbs, here to get that third eye open. Yes, indeed, I brought my laser surgery today. I sure did. All right, every generation has its purpose. Ours is to reveal the truth and reverse the brainwashing. And that's what we do right here on the Open Eye. We will get your mind cleared out. So let me start with a couple of PSAs. Coming up, August 1st. That's Saturday, August 1st, at Kirkwood Park, 11th and Kirkwood Streets, the 30th Annual African American Family Festival. Our theme, working together for peace in the community. There will be African libation, African drumming and dancing, Baba EA, remarks from council members like Michelle Harley and Xanthia Oliver. There will be open mic from 1 to 3 with local rappers, spoken word, poetry, community artists, featuring Miss Juneteenth, Tapping with PJ, singing and dancing by Sophia and Sarah Hughes, face painting, Essence Legacy. That will be August 1st, right here in Wilmington, 12 to 7 at Kirkwood Park, 11th and Kirkwood Streets. Please join us. All right, all right. And this is something that I've seen numerous times, but this is for our young people. Let me tell you something. If you can run a gang, you can run a company. If you can write a rap, you can write a book. If you can film a street fight, you can shoot a movie. Don't just take over the block, take over the world, and stop selling yourself short. All right, let me get my disclaimer out the way here. All right, we're going to get right to it. Where's that? Yeah, it is. Give me a minute.
The views and opinions expressed on Open Eye are those of the hosts, guests, and contributors, and do not reflect the policy or position of WHGE 95.3 FM nor our sponsor, the Delaware Center for Homeless Vets. Any content provided by Open Eye's hosts, guests, or contributors are theirs and are not intended to malign any religion, ethnic group, company, or individual.
All right. Let's get them started here. We're going to start right here. Let's see. Yep. All right. WHGE 95.3 FM, the Open Eye. All right. Yo, you hear me say this. You heard me say this a few times, I'm sure. If you're a regular Open Eye listener. Every night, I petition the ancestors for guidance, and every morning, the ancestors charge me to ring the alarm. But today, the ancestors didn't tell me to sound the alarm. Today, they told me to ring a bell of remembrance. Sometimes we look for greatness in monuments, in skyscrapers, or in famous speeches. But our history wasn't built only in grand places. Much of Black America's greatest work happened in ordinary places. Places with coffee cups, swivel stools, and the smell of fresh biscuits and fried chicken. Yeah. You know, between the 1940s and the 1970s, Harlem's lunch counters were never just places to eat. They were the heartbeat of the community. They were where a young man fresh off the train from Mississippi could sit beside a Pullman porter who had already learned how to survive New York. They were where a domestic worker finishing a long day could share a meal with a jazz musician just leaving the stage. Where lawyers, laborers, ministers, artists, teachers, and sanitation workers all occupied the same counter. Nobody asked how much money you had. They simply asked, what can I get you? Those lunch counters remind us of something America often forgets. A community is strongest when its people can see one another, talk to one another, and dream together. Yeah. Before there were social media feeds, there were lunch counters. Before there were podcasts, there were conversations over coffee. Before there were group chats, there were neighbors leaning across the counter saying, "Did you hear what's happening?" Or, "How can we help?" Those counters became living newspapers, employment agencies, counseling centers, political classrooms, and neighborhood watch meetings, all while serving plates of smothered pork chops, collard greens, candy yams, grits, cornbread, and sweet tea. For families arriving from Alabama, Georgia, Mississippi, Louisiana, South Carolina, and Virginia during the Great Migration, that first meal wasn't just food. It was home. It reminded them that although they had traveled 1,000 miles north, they hadn't left their culture behind. Our ancestors preserved history with recipes every bit as much as they preserved them with books. Yeah. And when the civil rights movement swept across America, Harlem's lunch counters became command centers of hope. While courageous young people sat at segregated lunch counters in the South demanding the right to be served, Black-owned lunch counters in Harlem were organizing fundraisers, collecting donations, planning boycotts, and preparing the next generation of freedom fighters. Revolution doesn't just begin with a microphone. Sometimes it begins over a cup of coffee. Sometimes it begins with one conversation. Sometimes it begins when someone says, "Pull up a stool." These businesses also prove another timeless truth. Economic freedom starts with ownership. Many of Harlem's legendary restaurants began with something as humble as a lunch counter. Sylvia Woods didn't begin with a sprawling empire. She started with a modest neighborhood establishment built through determination, family support, and faith in her community. That's how wealth grows. Not overnight, not by accident, but one customer, one paycheck, one business, one generation at a time. There's another lesson here for us today. We become a society where everybody is connected electronically, but too many people are disconnected personally. We scroll past one another instead of sitting beside one another. We text instead of talking. We argue through screens instead of breaking bread across a table. Maybe what we're missing isn't another act. Maybe what we're missing is another counter. Another place where people from different walks of life can simply sit together, listen to one another, laugh together, solve problems together, and remember that community is built face to face. Our ancestors understood something powerful. Food nourishes the body. Conversation nourishes the spirit. Community nourishes the future. The Harlem lunch counter was never just about breakfast. It was about belonging. It was about dignity. It was about opportunity. It was about hope served one plate at a time. So as we honor those neighborhood institutions, let us remember that every generation must build its own gathering places. Every generation must create spaces where young people can learn from elders, where entrepreneurs can encourage dreamers, where neighbors become family, and where strangers become allies. Because the strongest communities are not built by governments. They're built by people who decide to care for one another. And perhaps that's the greatest lesson Harlem ever served. Not on the stage, not in a courtroom, not in a history book, but across a simple lunch counter where everyone was welcome to pull up a stool. This is The Open Eye. I'm Patrice Gibbs. Hey, Sherry, I see you still. What's up, Steve? All right. Hey there, boy. All right. Let's keep them moving. WHGE 95.3 FM. This is The Open Eye. Yeah, that music was quite appropriate, huh? Yeah. That's Studio Time Blues by Patrice Gibbs. Yeah. All right. Jay-Z. Where's that? Yeah, bastard fucking son of a bitch. Okay. Back on. I had to turn the mic back on. Jay-Z, you are not the movement. Sorry ass. Let's stop rewriting history. There are organizations and celebrities who have tried to convince people that Jay-Z is part of the movement. He is not. Jay-Z, you're not an activist, you're not an advocate, you're not an organizer, and you sure as hell ain't no goddamn revolutionary. Writing checks is not the same thing as building movements. Too often, you'll use your wealth not to strengthen grassroots organizations, but to neutralize opposition and protect business interests. You call yourself a businessman, okay, fine. Then let's judge you as a businessman. And from where many people stand, your business model has repeatedly come at the expense of the very black community that made you. Remember Brooklyn? The public was led to believe you were buying the Brooklyn Nets. That narrative helped generate excitement around the Barclays Center project. But what followed was rapid gentrification that transformed neighborhoods, displaced longtime black residents, and forever changed the character of the community. Then at the help and sell the dream, you sold your stake and walked away. You're sorry ass. Brooklyn's still living with the consequences. Boy, you piece of God. Then came Black Lives Matter. While activists were in the streets organizing, marching, risking arrest, sacrificing jobs, and in some cases, paying with years of their lives. Colin Kaepernick took a knee to protest police violence and systemic racism. Many believed you would stand beside him. Instead, you publicly declared we're past kneeling. Then came that NFL partnership. People believed you were going to use your influence to challenge the league from within. Instead, the partnership largely benefited the NFL while helping shift public attention away from Kaepernick's protests. And then there was Tidal. It was promoted as a platform that would empower artists. And in the minds of many supporters, represent black ownership in the music industry. Fans signed up. Artists invested their credibility. And the company was sold. Supporters who believed they were building something lasting were left wondering what happened to the vision they had been asked to believe in. Jay-Z sold your ass out. And now, Target. At the time when many black consumers are participating in organized boycotts over concerns about corporate commitments to diversity and equity, all right, critics argue that unity matters. Boycotts work by concentrating economic pressure. Yet instead of enforcing that collective effort, you launched an exclusive partnership with the very company that activists were asking people to avoid. Then, rather than acknowledging the strategy behind a boycott, you appear to criticize people for picking and choosing. But that's exactly how boycotts work. You scatter your economic pressure. You focus it. You don't scatter it. You don't scatter it. You focus it. That's how Montgomery worked. That's how labor strikes work. That's how every successful economic movement works. You don't weaken the pressure. You intensify it. Whether people agree with every criticism or not, this much is undeniable. Generations of black people bought your albums, filled your concerts, built your fortune, defended your legacy, and elevated you into one of the wealthiest entertainers in history. The question many are now asking is simple. When the community asks for economic solidarity, why does your business always seem to come first? Because movements require sacrifice. Businesses require profit. And history has a way of revealing which one a person ultimately chooses. That's why many activists reject the idea that Jay-Z represents the movement. Because he doesn't organize, he doesn't lead, he profits. And that sure as hell ain't the same damn thing. Jay-Z, you are a sellout piece of crap. You are not the movement, you are not part of our community. You're doing more damage than good. May you roast in hell, you sorry bastard. This is the Open Eye. WHGE 95.3 FM. This is the Open Eye. Do you know the real reason America was taught to fear socialism? Let me break this down for you. Let's tell the part of the story that usually gets edited out. Because it's the part that explains everything. See, Americans have been taught to fear socialism for generations. But that fear was never about economics. It was never about Karl Marx. It was never about government programs. It was always tangled up with race. Go back to the New Deal of the 1930s. Franklin Delano Roosevelt created Social Security, labor protections, unemployment insurance, and many of the programs that became the foundation of America's modern safety net. Millions of Americans benefited. But there was a catch. To get those bills through Congress, Roosevelt needed the votes of Southern Democrats, the political guardians of Jim Crow. They agreed to support the legislation, but only if black people were largely excluded from its protections. For instance, the original Social Security Act deliberately excluded agricultural workers and domestic workers. That may sound like a technical policy decision, but it wasn't. See, in the Jim Crow South, those were overwhelmingly jobs black Americans held. The exclusion was not accidental. It was political by design. Political scientist Ira Casson-Nelson documented this history in extraordinary detail in his groundbreaking book, When Affirmative Action Was White. The American safety net wasn't simply built with limitations, it was built with a hole cut into exactly where black America was standing. That wasn't a flaw in the system, it was the system. And once that pattern was established, it became one of the oldest tricks in American politics. Whenever politicians wanted to weaken public programs, they didn't attack the wealthy. They didn't attack corporations collecting subsidies. They racialized the people receiving assistance. See? They taught working class white Americans not to picture themselves using government programs. They taught them to picture black people. The most infamous example was the so-called welfare queen. During the 70s and 80s, politicians like that bastard Ronald Reagan made roasting hell and made it double sodomizing with a pitchfork, and the media outlets pushed the image of a black woman supposedly living lavishly of her taxpayers while driving a Cadillac. The story actually became a cultural symbol. The problem, it was a myth, but it accomplished exactly what it was designed to accomplish. It transformed public assistance from we take care of one another. That's what public assistance was when white people were getting it. And transformed into they're stealing from you. Yeah. That shift changed American politics. The debate stopped being about whether government should protect ordinary people. Instead, it became about convincing one group of working people that another group of working people was the enemy. That's the hidden engine behind much of America's panic over socialism. The word actually became a racial dog whistle. Makers versus takers. Those people, your tax dollars. I use the pie analogy. The wealthy elites teach poor and working class whites that the pie is almost gone because them poor black people over there got your piece of the pie while that wealthy elite walks off with 8 slices. Government handouts, your tax dollars. The message was simple. Don't worry about the billionaires taking billions from the treasury. Be angry at the poor black family receiving food assistance. And millions bought into it. That's why Americans can proudly cash their Social Security checks, drive on publicly funded highways, send their children to public schools, call publicly funded police and fire departments, rely on Medicare, collect unemployment insurance, and receive disaster relief. Then turn around and declare they hate socialism. Dumbass. Because in their minds, those programs belong to them. They only become socialism when they imagine someone else, especially someone black, receiving the same benefits. This has been one of the greatest political manipulations in American history. It divided workers who shared the same economic interests. It protected concentrated wealth from accountability, and it convinced millions of Americans to vote against policies that would have improved their own lives simply because they feared someone they had been taught to resent might benefit too. Once you understand that history, you begin to hear the coded language everywhere. The debate was never just about economics. It was about who America believed was worthy of belonging. And until we confront the truth, politicians will continue to use race to convince ordinary people to defend the system that serves the powerful while keeping everyone else fighting over scraps. Dumbass. Your chicken voting for Colonel Sanders. Jump your ass in the hot grease. This is the Open Eye. I'm Patrice Gibbs. Hey, Dave. I see you, bro. All right. WHGE 95.3 FM. You're enjoying the Open Eye. You know, we confused about things. We got the wrong people addressing the wrong problems. Because white supremacy is a white problem. White supremacy will not die until white people start seeing as a black issue they need to empathize with and start seeing it as a white issue they need to solve. For centuries, black people have marched against it, prayed against it, voted against it, litigated against it, organized against it, and died resisting it. Yet every time white supremacy reveals itself, America turns to black people and asks for patience, forgiveness, and understanding. Why? Black people didn't start this crap. We didn't create white supremacy. We didn't write slave codes. We didn't build Jim Crow. We didn't create redlining. And we sure as hell didn't found the Ku Klux Klan. And we didn't invent the myths of racial superiority used to justify slavery, lynching, segregation, mass incarceration, or racial terror. White supremacy is not our disease. We are as victims. Oh, there's the victim card. That's the reality. We are the enemy of white supremacy. The responsibility for ending it belongs first and foremost to those communities that continue to tolerate, excuse, or ignore it. That means challenging the racist uncle at Thanksgiving. Confronting the co-worker who want to get up and tell some racial jokes. Rejecting politicians who campaign on fear, division, and racial resentment. Refusing to remain silent when injustice is committed in your name. Silence has never been neutral. Silence has always been the oxygen that allows injustice to breathe. ICE has become one of the most aggressive modern expressions of a system that disproportionately targets black communities and communities of color through militarized raids, racial profiling allegations, family separations, and fear-based enforcement. ICE needs to be abolished. Of course, that didn't come up until ICE started killing white people. But it's been a white problem all along. History has never been written by polite request alone. Slavery did not end because enslavers suddenly found compassion. Colonial empires did not retreat because they discovered justice. Illegal segregation did not collapse because segregationists woke up one morning with a change of heart. Systems of oppression fall when the people being oppressed refuse to accept them, raise the political, economic, and moral costs of maintaining them, and force those in power to confront a simple reality. The old system cannot survive. Power rarely gives up privilege voluntarily. It gives it up when holding on becomes more dangerous than letting go. So if white supremacy is ever going to be defeated, it will not happen because black people explain our pain one more time. It will happen when enough white Americans decide that protecting racism is no longer worth the cost, morally, politically, economically, or socially. Until then, the burden of resistance will continue to fall on those who never created the problem in the first place. White supremacy is not a black problem. It is America's oldest white problem. And until America treats it that way, America will never be free of it. It's up to you. WHGE 95.3 FM, the Open High. All right. This is the Open Eye. Patrice Gibbs. He's got a knife. Taser, taser, taser. Y'all know what I'm talking about. A Wisconsin police officer shot and killed a black man Wednesday by firing 3 rounds into his head. It's an incident that witnesses and a candidate for governor described as an execution, sparking protests and outrage in Madison. Madison police have attempted to justify the shooting, claiming the man identified as Corey Ruiz stabbed the officer and injured him. However, videos recorded by several witnesses do not show the officer bleeding or even appearing injured. He's got a knife. Police have not identified the officer, who is not wearing a body camera because the Madison Police Department says it can't afford them. The officer appears to have been wearing a bulletproof vest, which could have protected him from the alleged knife. A screenshot taken after the shooting shows the officer standing next to another officer rather than being rushed to the hospital, which would have typically occurred if an officer had been stabbed. Democratic State Representative Francesca Hahn, who is running for governor, described the shooting as what it was, an execution. She also compared it to the 2015 Madison police killing of Tony Robinson, a 19-year-old black man who was unarmed when the officer shot and killed him. "I'm horrified and devastated," she wrote on the social media platform. Yeah. Devastating. If you've seen the video, it is no doubt in your mind that this was just an execution. Y'all better wake up. It's hunting season. Execution for justified force. Another day, another black man dead at the hands of police. Another official press release asking America to believe the police before believing your own eyes. According to police, officers confronted Ruiz over reports that someone was stealing bicycles and checking car doors. They say a struggle followed. They say Ruiz pulled a fixed blade knife. They say he stabbed the officer. Of course, ain't nobody seen no blood. Ain't no officer go to the hospital. They said that officer then fired the shots that killed him. But then came the videos. See? Multiple bystanders recorded the encounter from different angles. The video showed several officers already struggling with Ruiz. An officer can be heard yelling he's got a knife. A female officer runs into the scene shouting, "Taser, taser, taser." Less than 5 seconds later, 3 gunshots. If you've seen the videos, it's horrific. If you haven't, I advise you not to watch it. 3 gunshots, not in the air, not into the torso. 3 shots into the head at point blank range. That's why people are calling it an execution. And just the day before, a video went viral of a white man actually chasing a cop. And yes, he had a weapon. I think he had a knife. And another video, the white man straight up shooting at the cops, face to face. They didn't even shoot back. Somehow they were able to de-escalate the situation and take these people alive. Now, if an officer had truly been stabbed, where's the evidence? Where's the blood? Where's the frantic emergency response? Why do the videos appear to show the officer standing afterward instead of being rushed immediately to an ambulance? Those are the questions. They deserve answers. The investigation, not assumptions, have to determine what happened. Because we know what happened because the video, like I said, was shot from several angles. And there's another disturbing fact. Madison police officers were not wearing body cameras. What I tell you about them not wearing body cameras? They weren't even wearing them. You catch them turning them off, they get ready to do some dirt. In Madison, they don't even wear them. Not because they forgot, not because they malfunctioned, because the department says it can't afford them. And think about that. Police departments routinely find money for armored vehicles, tactical equipment, surveillance technology, military-grade weapons, and overtime. But somehow there's never enough money for the one tool that protects both the public and the honest police officers from false accusations. They can't afford them. They don't want them. They don't want them because the whole goddamn police force is corrupt and they don't want accountability on video. Without body cameras, the public is once again forced to rely on the shaky cell phone videos, conflicting witness statements, and the police department investigating itself. And we know how that goes. Because that's not transparency. That's a recipe for public distrust. And well, it should be. The outrage has spread well beyond Madison. Protesters have filled the streets. Public officials, including Democratic gubernatorial candidate Francesca Hahn, described what she saw on the video as what it was: an execution. The mayor is calling the killing a tragedy. Others have drawn painful comparisons to previous police killings that left communities demanding accountability. Sister Sherry said, I posted about those body cams years ago when police first started wearing them. I knew then that cops would be able to turn them off whenever they wanted to. Yeah. No accountability. So this case reminds us of something larger. Too often after a police shooting, attention quickly shifts away from the killing itself and onto the victim's criminal history. When we hear about old arrests, misdemeanor records, unpaid fines, or mistakes made years earlier, none of that answers the central question. Why was the use of deadly force lawful, necessary, and proportionate under the circumstances? That question has to be answered based on facts of the encounter, not on whether the victim lived a perfect life. No one should have to earn the right to receive a fair investigation after they die. But we know how that goes, because black people are the only people put on trial for their own murder. The public deserves every available video, every radio transmission, every forensic report, every witness interview, every fact. Because trust cannot exist without transparency. And justice cannot exist without accountability. If the officers acted lawfully, the evidence would prove it. If they did not, the evidence would prove that too. America cannot continue asking communities to simply accept official narratives while withholding the very evidence that would allow the public to judge those narratives for themselves. And keep your eyes open, because justice cannot survive in darkness. Stay woke. It's the Open Eye. WHGE 95.3 FM. This is the Open Eye. And I thank Dr. Stacy Patton for pointing this out to us. All right. Let me tell you why the room went silent and why so many black people audibly gasped. What am I talking about? I'm talking about when Attorney Ben Crump revealed that some of Nolan Wells' organs were not with his body when it was returned to Washington. Those were not gasps of ignorance. Those were gasps of memory. Those were the echoes of generations who have learned, often through bitter experience, that black bodies have too often been treated as property long after death. Black America has a historical memory that this country keeps demanding we forget. We remember the grave robbers who raided black cemeteries to supply medical schools with cadavers because universities wanted bodies but refused to obtain them ethically. We remember that for decades. Black cemeteries were targeted because society believed black families had little power to fight back. We remember the so-called father of modern gynecology, Dr. J. Merriam Sims, who built his reputation by performing repeated experimental surgeries on enslaved black women without anesthesia, believing their pain somehow mattered less. We remember the Tuskegee syphilis study, where black men were deliberately deceived and denied treatment for decades, not because medicine couldn't help them, but because researchers wanted to watch the disease destroy their bodies. We remember Henrietta Lacks, whose cancer cells were taken without her knowledge or her family's consent. Those cells became one of the most important tools in modern medical research, generating immeasurable scientific and commercial value, while her family remained in the dark for years. We remember stories of organs retained without meaningful consent, bodies used for research without families knowing, and medical records manipulated to fit official narratives rather than uncomfortable truths. How many of you saw the video of the young black woman who had a C-section and felt the need to leave the hospital because of the unusual behavior of the white nurses? And then when she demanded her baby and tried to leave the hospital, they tried to hold her in the hospital, even calling the cops. And yes, we remember the countless suspicious black deaths that were official reports seemed designed less to uncover the truth than preserve public confidence in the institutions responsible for investigating them. So when black families hear that organs are missing, when they hear that parts of a loved one's body are not where they were expected to be, when they hear technical explanations before they receive complete answers, history comes rushing into the room. That reaction is not born from ignorance. It's born from experience. Now let me be clear. Modern forensic pathology follows established procedures, and there are legitimate reasons why organs may be retained during an autopsy for further examination or testing. Families deserve a full, transparent explanation of those procedures. What was retained, why it was retained, whether it would be returned, and every step taken to preserve evidence. But transparency only works when trust already exists. And trust is precisely what history has stolen. For centuries, respectable men in white coats used medical language to justify the unjustifiable. They called experimentation science. They call it exploitation research. they call racial abuse medicine. Technical language has too often been used to sanitize moral crimes. That's why those gas matter. They were not accusing anyone of wrongdoing. They were revealing something far deeper, a wound that is never fully healed. When institutions repeatedly violate people's trust across generations, every unexplained detail becomes another reminder of yesterday. This is why history matters. Because history doesn't stay buried in textbooks. History walks in the hospital rooms. History walks in the morgues. History sits beside grieving mothers. History speaks every time another black family is told to simply trust the process. The question isn't why black people reacted the way they did. The real question is why America still acts surprised that centuries of medical abuse, exploitation, and deception continue to shape the way black communities hear official explanations today. Until institutions understand that black history lives inside every investigation, every autopsy, and every unanswered question, they will continue asking people to trust systems that have spent generations teaching us not to. That's why I tell you, the medical injuries in the medical industry is the black women, what the police force is the black men. This is the open eye. WHGE 95.3 FM. I'm Patrice Gibbs. All right. Let's get global here because we don't live in a vacuum. Yeah, we're hearing a lot these days about state-sponsored terrorism. Government issued lists. Politicians hold press conferences. Sanctions are imposed. And the Western powers present themselves as the guardians of so-called rules-based international order. But we're going to have an honest conversation about state-sponsored terrorism. Let's have an honest conversation. Because if the standard is financing, arming, enabling, or providing political cover for the systemic killing of civilians to achieve political objectives, then the conversation cannot begin and end with America's enemies. It must also include America's allies and America itself. Look at Palestine. For decades, Western governments have provided diplomatic protection, military assistance, intelligence cooperation, and economic support to Israel while Palestinians have endured occupation, displacement, repeated military assaults, and enormous civilian casualties. Whether one supports Israel policies or not, no serious discussion of state violence can ignore the role outside governments have played in sustaining that. Look at Yemen. The world watches Saudi-fed airstrikes devastated neighborhoods, hospitals, schools, markets, weddings, and funerals. American and British weapons, logistical support, and military cooperation became part of that war. The result was one of the worst humanitarian catastrophes of the modern era. Millions facing hunger, disease, and displacement. And then there's Iraq and Syria. We are often told groups like ISIS simply emerge because of ancient hatreds, or religious extremism. Don't be foolish. But history tells a more complicated story. The invasion of Iraq, the collapse of state institutions, sectarian policies, regional proxy wars, and the flow of weapons and fighters into Syria all created conditions that extremist organizations exploited. Numerous analysts have argued that years of intervention and proxy conflict helped create the instability from which ISIS emerged, and that's the reality. And that pattern didn't begin in the Middle East. In Latin America, the United States supported anti-communist operations across the region during the Cold War, including backing the Contras in Nicaragua and providing support to governments and security forces implicated in severe human rights abuses in countries such as Guatemala and El Salvador. And they did it based out of Honduras, another country that you know, they colonized. Gee, how you know that? Because I was there. Now let's go back to Southeast Asia, Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia. Entire societies were subjected to years of devastating bombing campaigns. Millions of civilians were caught in the crossfire. Agent Orange poisoned generations. Unexploded ordnance continues to kill innocent people decades after the wars officially ended. Time after time, civilian suffering was explained away as collateral damage. Civilian deaths became strategic necessity. Bombing campaigns became bringing democracy. Occupation became liberation. The language changed, the victims did not. Now understand what I'm saying and what I'm not saying. This is not an attempt to excuse terrorism committed by non-state actors. Deliberately targeting civilians is morally wrong, whether it's done by an individual, organization, or a government. That principle has to be universal. If murdering civilians for political objectives is terrorism when a militant group does it, then enabling or carrying out the mass killing of civilians cannot suddenly become something noble simply because the missiles are launched by a nation state or because the bombs carry the logo of a powerful military alliance or the United States. Justice loses all meaning when it's applied selectively. International law loses all credibility when powerful nations enforce it against their rivals while exempting themselves and their allies. The world does not need more lectures about morality from governments that ain't got no goddamn morality. And refuse to examine their own conduct. The world needs consistency, accountability, and needs the courage to admit that terror does not become acceptable because it flies under a national flag, comes with a press secretary, or explained away at a podium. Because peace will never come into this world until we stop judging violence by who commits it and start judging it by what it does to human beings. That's the only standard worthy of justice. And that's how we get peace. I'm Patrice Gibbs. All right. WHGE 95.3 FM. This is it. It's the Open Eye. You often hear me mention what's coming. Because, see, things work in cycles. Hey, colonizer, your time's just about up. And you know it. In the face of that expiration is Ibrahim Toure. Open Eye listeners know I often end my show with GAS, Global African Supremacy. Colonizers been ruling for 500 years. The time's up. Because Ibrahim Toure has become more than the president of Burkina Faso. Across Africa, he's become a symbol of something millions of Africans have been waiting for. Leadership that acts instead of leadership that talks. For more than 6 decades after independence, too many African governments have mastered the art of holding elections while failing to build nations. Democracy by itself does not build roads. It does not manufacture airplanes. It does not process minerals. It does not modernize agriculture. And it certainly does not stop corruption. A ballot is not development. I don't care what the colonizer told you. Look across the continent. Budgets are approved year after year. Roads remain unfinished. Hospitals remain understaffed. Schools continue to deteriorate. Ministers walk in office with modest means and somehow leave as millionaires. The people are told that democracy is working because they voted. But what good is the vote if corruption always wins the election? Leadership should be measured by results, not speeches. And that's why Toure has captured the imagination of so many Africans. He speaks the language of production instead of dependency. He speaks the language of sovereignty instead of foreign approval. Africa should not continue exploiting raw diamonds while importing expensive jewelry. Africa should not export cocoa beans and then pay your premium prices for chocolate. Africa should not export coffee only to buy it back with someone else's label stamped on it. Africa should not ship out their uranium, gold, lithium, cobalt, and rare earth minerals while importing finished products at 10 times the value. That's not trade. That's organized underdevelopment. And according to widely circulated reports about his priorities, Traore has also questioned sending Africa's students abroad to study subjects that do little to address the continent's immediate development needs, arguing instead that Africa's greatest investment should be in agriculture, engineering, science, medicine, technology, manufacturing, and business. They don't need to be sent to some Arab country to study Sharia law. Whether one agrees with every aspect of that position or not, the larger point deserves serious consideration. Africa cannot engineer bridges with religious debate. Africa cannot build power plants with theology. Africa cannot manufacture trains with ideology. Africa cannot feed hundreds of millions of people without agricultural science. Africa cannot compete in the 21st century without engineers, scientists, entrepreneurs, doctors, technicians, software developers, and skilled workers. The continent needs practical knowledge that produces food, creates jobs, develops industries, and builds wealth. That's why Ibrahim Toure opened Africa's borders, opened Burkina Faso's borders. because he understands how to raise up a society. You bring in the scientists, you bring in the teachers, you bring in the agriculturalists, you bring in the doctors, you take care of the people's health and minds. Yeah, skilled workers. The future of Africa will not be determined by who can quote the most scripture. It will be determined by who can build the most factories, generate the most electricity, produce the most food, educate the most engineers, and create the most economic independence. This is why so many young Africans see Ibrahim Traoré as a model. Not because they want another strong man, but because they are tired of leaders who are strong only when stealing from their own people and weak whenever foreign powers give them orders. Africa does not suffer from a shortage of resources. Africa suffers from a shortage of leadership committed to transforming those resources into prosperity for African people. The challenge before this generation is bigger than supporting one man. It's about demanding a new standard of leadership across the continent. A leader should be judged by one question. Did you leave your nation more productive, more educated, more industrialized, more self-sufficient, more united than you found it? Because that is the path to global African supremacy. And if the answer is no, history should judge that leadership accordingly. Africa spent decades exporting its wealth. Perhaps it's finally time to export finished products instead. And importing knowledge. That is the path to the future. This is the Open Eye. WHGE 95.3 FM. You know, America loves to tell itself that it has moved beyond its racist past. It points to its civil rights laws, diversity slogans, and black faces in high places as proof that the old America is gone. But here's the question. If America has changed so much, why is black death still treated as entertainment, justification, or indifference? This country has always had a disturbing relationship with black death. When a black person dies under suspicious circumstances, the first instinct is often not to investigate. It is to explain it away. It was an accident. It's a suicide. He resisted. She shouldn't have been there. Oh, he had a criminal record. She was no angel. Yeah. The victim is placed on trial while the circumstances of the death are quietly buried. We've seen it over and over again. Black children playing in parks, black people sleeping in their own homes, walking home from school, sitting in a car, reaching for identification, sleeping on grandmom's couch, even infants caught in police violence. Somehow, someone always finds a way to explain why their deaths were inevitable. And when families grieve, when communities cry, when people demand answers, they're mocked, ridiculed, told to get over it. That's what happens when you spend centuries teaching a society that one group of people is less than human. Eventually, the victims aren't the only ones who lose something. The people celebrating that suffering lose their own humanity. I used to study photographs of Jim Crow lynchings. What haunted me wasn't the broken body hanging from a tree. It was the crowd. And I've spoken about this many times. It was the smiling faces. The men in suits. Women in Sunday dresses. Children standing beside their parents smirking. People grinning as if they were attending a county fair instead of witnessing murder. And for years I've asked myself, how could they smile? And then I stopped asking. Because in 2026, they're still smiling. The tree has often been replaced by a police encounter, a detention center, a jail cell, a suspicious death that authorities rush to close. The mob may now gather online instead of on a courthouse lawn. The postcards have become memes. The cheers have become comment sections. But the celebration of Black death remains. Look at the reaction whenever another Black life is lost under suspicious circumstances. Look at the comments celebrating, mocking, dismissing, and laughing. Look at the people who cheer every police shooting before the facts are even known. Look at those who treat every grieving Black family as an enemy instead of fellow human beings deserving compassion. Take the reaction to the death of Nolan Wells. While many people demanded answers and mourned the loss of a young life, others celebrated, mocked, and dismissed the tragedy altogether. And that should really terrify decent people. That should just not decent. Because for every one of us who looks at another Black death with heartbreak, there are others who look at it with satisfaction. Not everyone who disagrees with the circumstances of a case is motivated by racism. And it's important not to assume that about every individual. But there is also a visible reality. Openly racist voices and extremist communities often celebrate or mock the death of Black people, and social media has made those reactions impossible to ignore. Think about what that says. Some people are willing to risk friendship, career, reputation, and public shame just to celebrate the suffering of Black people. That's not politics. That's not patriotism. That's moral depravity. A society should not be judged by how loudly it celebrates its heroes. It should be judged by how it responds to the vulnerable, the powerless, and the dead. Because when people can watch another human being die, laugh about it, justify it, and move on without a shred of empathy, the greatest victim isn't only the person who lost their life. That society has no soul, and no nation can call itself civilized while celebrating the humanity it has destroyed. Wake up. This is the Open Eye. Yes, indeed, Jan. That discussion should be international, by all means. All right. All right, my children of the sun. I hope you learned something, because I learned something before I got here. All right, And I want to leave you with this. History does not ask whether you were comfortable. History asks whether you were courageous. Every generation is given a choice. You can inherit the world exactly as it is, or you can accept the responsibility of transforming it. All right? The people we admire today, Harriet Tubman, Frederick Douglass, Ida B. Wells, Fannie Lou Hamer, Malcolm X, Dr. King, Ella Baker, Kwame Nkrumah, Thomas Sankara, Winnie Mandela, Patrice Lumumba. They were not extraordinary because they were fearless. They were extraordinary because they refused to let fear determine their future. That same choice belongs to us. Don't let the constant flood of bad news convince you that our people are powerless. We have survived the slave ships. We survived the auction block. We survived lynching. We survived Jim Crow. We survived counter-intelpro. We survived mass incarceration. We have buried generations and still managed to create music, science, literature, businesses, families, movements, and hope. If our ancestors could build communities while carrying chains, imagine what we can carry, what we can build while carrying knowledge. Read more than you scroll. Organize more than you complain. Build more than you consume. Teach more than you argue. And whenever possible, replace despair with disciplined action. Remember that no one is coming to save us. We must save ourselves with clear minds, united communities, economic discipline, political education, and unwavering love for our people. And as I always tell you, every night I petition the ancestors for guidance, and every morning the ancestors charge me to sound the alarm. They remind me that our struggle is not simply about surviving another day. It's about leaving behind a stronger foundation for those who will come after us. So walk proudly this week. Protect your family. Check your elders. Encourage your children. Support black businesses. Read a good book. Speak the truth without apology. And never surrender your mind to those who profit from your confusion. Keep your eye open, because those who control what you see often control what you believe. All right? This is the open eye. And as we always tell you, destiny determines who enters your life, but you decide who stays. Therefore, value those who value you, and don't treat those as a priority who treat you as an option. This has been the Open Eye on WHGE 95.3 FM. I'm Patrice Gibbs. Thanks for joining us. All right. Like I said, it's coming. Ibrahim Touré is not the only one. Global African supremacy, because the world was a much better place when the African ruled. I'm Patrice Gibbs. Peace and love.